Welcome back, Coach Chad from the Becker Bass team, here to talk today about crankbaits. Now, Dusty said I can make another video as long as we had over 100 likes on the video, and we did surpass that. And no, Dusty, I did not watch it a bunch of times to get that number up. So let's first talk about crankbaits. One of my favorite baits to throw. I know a lot of you guys probably don't throw it as much as you should, and you're missing out. There's a time and a place for everything, and hopefully I can kind of show you some of the stuff of why I think that throwing crankbaits can be very productive for you. I look at crankbaits as a search bait. If I'm in a fishing area that I want to try to find where the fish are at, be it like a large weed flat, I'm going to throw a crankbait. Whether it's a lipless or a diving crankbait, it all depends on what the conditions tell me. But I can cover a lot of water fast and cover a lot of area instead of just going through right away using plastics or whatever. So I can go and find active fish, and then I can always go back to those areas where I did catch a fish and start picking it apart, throwing plastics, jigs, whatever the case. Another thing, what it'll tell me is the activity level of fish. You know, if they're willing to hit a crank, I know they're usually pretty active. If I'm not getting much action out of an area that I think should be holding fish, then I know they're kind of probably more in a neutral to negative mood, and they'll start slowing down and fishing that way. You know, and one other thing you can do is watch, when you're watching TV shows, watch what they're using. You'll be surprised how many of the pros are throwing cranks. You know, they're winning tournaments. It's not always a winning presentation, but it's definitely part of it. And that's what I try to emphasize when I take kids on the boat. It's just another tool in your toolbox. I don't throw crankbaits all the time. I throw them a lot, but I usually, use other baits also. So there's different categories of crankbaits that I'm going to be talking about today. One, lipless crankbait, which basically means there is no bill or lip on the bait. Got shallow diving crankbaits, medium diving crankbaits, deeper diving crankbaits, deep diving crankbaits, shallow diving crankbaits, but a bigger body. And then we got your minnow style baits or stick baits. This is a deeper diving. This is a shallower diving. So we're going to start off with the lipless crankbaits. Very versatile bait. You can use this in 1 foot of water. You can use this in theoretically 30 feet of water. Probably one of the most versatile baits out there as far as a crankbait. They come in a few different sizes. Most common we all use is a 1/2 ounce. They do make 3/4 ounce also. This is made by Strike King. It's called the Red Eye Shad. Started using this last year. Really like the bait. Designed to be casted out. This is a sinking bait, so you can't cast it out and sit there and screw around because it'll sink and go into the weeds, and kind of wasted your cast. Cast it out, start reeling it, unless you want it to sink down to a certain depth if you're fishing deeper water. This bait is designed to be run fast. You can run it slower, stop and go. You can even vertical jig it if you wanted to. Never tried it, but you can do it. Probably one of my most favorite crankbaits the last few years is a square bill. That's how it got its name. It's got a square bill. Designed to run fairly shallow, 3 to 5 feet. Really wide, aggressive action. It deflects off of weeds and rocks fairly well. This is a mid-depth crankbait. This is going to run 6-8 feet of water. Usually a lot of times I'll run this, fishing 10-12 foot of water, weeds growing up, 6-7 feet. You can kind of tell by the bill, the bigger the bill, the deeper they're going to go. You should be able to look at a crankbait in your box if you're going to start using them and just being able to look at the bill to kind of get an idea of how deep a water you're going to be able to fish with this. You know, if you're fishing over weed tops that come up 8 feet of water, you start throwing a bait that's designed to go down 16 feet, within probably 4 seconds you're going to be, you know, loaded up with weeds. So you really kind of need to know what your crankbaits, the bill kind of pretty much tells you everything. This one here goes down to 14 feet. As you can see, as the deeper it goes, the bill starts getting a little bit wider and longer. That's an indication. A lot of the companies now are even stamping on it, you know, how deep they run on the bottom of the bait, or some are even, you know, on top of the bill. This one goes down to 16 feet. You can see the bill is even wider now. You know, it's getting to be like a spoon bill type of shape. Now this is another square bill, except the body is almost, you know, half again as big. I like using these baits more so in the fall. They work dynamite because the fish are feeding, they're trying to fatten up, they're looking for big easy meals. These are the ticket. These are stick baits. You see a lot of, you know, the walleye guys using them for trolling. They work pretty good for bass. I don't use them a lot. Haven't had a ton of luck on them, but I have them just in case I need to try something different. This one's a diving one. You can see the bill there again, rounded, wide. And this is going to be a shallow runner. Now you can tell by the location of the bill on your bait if it's going to be more of a shallow diving bait compared to a deeper diving bait. Deeper diving baits, the bill is usually always going to come off the tip or the front of the bait. They're designed to dig down and, you know, catch water, dig down deep. Your shallower running baits, you can see how the bill is underneath the mouth or the front of the bait. They're not designed to get, you know, dive down too deep. You can see that with the square bills also. They're kind of underneath where the line is right there, compared to they're coming right straight off the front of the bait. That alone will be able to tell you if that's going to be a deeper diving bait or a shallower diving bait. That, and bigger the bill, the deeper they're going to go. Next thing I want to talk about, does line affect how your bait is going to perform? Absolutely. Line diameter is going to determine if your bait is going to go shallower or going to go deeper. The thicker diameter the line is, the shallower that bait is going to go. A lot of people are using braid now, very thin diameter. That bait's going to go deeper than what the lure company is, you know, saying it should. So you get a bait like the square bill here, you know, they say it runs 3 to 5 feet. You throw it on braid, you're going to probably get all of the 5 feet, if not more. The thinner the diameter, the deeper this is going to go. So you kind of need to take that in consideration when you're throwing baits, and especially if you're going to be switching rods and reels. Know what you got on there for line, because that's going to affect, you know, how deep your bait is running. So let's just say, give me an example, you're throwing it, let's say 12-pound mono. And that bait's running, let's say 4 feet down. For whatever reason, that rod and reel goes down, you grab another rod. But now you're running, you know, braid, and let's say the diameter is kind of equal to like 8-pound mono. And that bait is going to run deeper. So it's going to affect how deep that bait is running. You know, and if you're running that bait on mono, it's going down 4 feet. Now this bait on braid is going to go down, let's say 6 feet. You could be below the fish, you're not going to get the action. So just because you're not getting fish doesn't mean they stop biting on that bait or that color. It could just be you're running that bait too deep. So you need to get that bait back up into the strike zone. So you need to pay attention to what you're using for line. Rod and reel combos. In an ideal world, what I like throwing crankbaits on is a 6.5, 7 foot medium heavy action rod. You know, with whatever line you're going to use, but be consistent. The action I want on it is going to be a moderate soft tip action. You need to have some stretch. You know, line makes a difference. If you're going to use braid, you need to have, you know, medium action to medium heavy with that soft tip, because you need a shock absorber, because there is no stretch in braid. With crankbaits, topwater, any type of baits with treble hooks, the bass have a tendency to spit those baits fairly easy compared to throwing a jig, spinner bait, even Texas rig, you know, single hooks. So you need to have a compromise. If you're going to go with braid, you got to have the cushion of the rod to get the stretch you need. The only exception I would have to that rule is if you're going to be throwing these deep diving cranks, and if you're going to be doing it for any length of period of time, just to be able to save your arm, your shoulder, and wrist, you don't want to throw this thing on a heavy action rod. You can throw braid. I would use a higher gear ratio reel, 7.3 to 1, whatever, just to be able, because this is going to be a lot of resistance pulling this bait through the water. You know, ideal, you know, use what you got. But in a perfect world, that's what I would use. You know, some people ask, you know, do you have baits rattle that don't rattle? I have both of them. You know, not all my baits will be rattling. It is what it is.
It is what it is.
I don't make a big deal as far as when I'm buying baits if they're going to rattle or not. Rattling baits work better in stained, dirty water. Gives something the bass to hone in on a little bit more compared to clear water. But I don't really make that a factor when I'm buying baits, whether or not they rattle or not. Majority of them do all have rattles in them. So another thing people ask is colors. Colors is a very subjective thing. I don't like to get too involved in it because everybody's got their own opinion on it. I like to try to have baits that have whatever the primary bait fish is going to be. I want to have that bait to have some of the colors of that bait in there to try to mimic. You know, it doesn't have to look, you know, this is supposed to be kind of like a bass, baby bass type of pattern. It doesn't have to be like a photogenic picture of it. You know, this bait here is, you know, it's made by Strike King. It's called the Sexy Sunfish. You know, it's to resemble a sunfish. It's got some of the colors in it, some green, some blue. You know, same with this, it's going to have blue, some yellow. You know, lakes that's got crayfish in it, you know, have some red, oranges, you know, sometimes blue. It all depends on what phase the molt that the crayfish are in, which you're really not going to know unless you actually see them in the water. So color isn't that big of a critical to me as far as telling you what to buy, you know, other than try to figure out, you know, in this area up here, we're pretty much dealing with sunfish as their main source of prey. So, you know, just if you buy baits with that, got those colors in it, you should be okay. So the next thing, you know, when the colors is a lot of it just comes down to confidence. You know, if you have confidence in that bait, you know, whatever style bait it is or the color, you know, that alone is going to catch you more fish. You know, that's when I'm throwing crankbaits and teaching kids how to throw crankbaits, you know, the big part of it is, you know, building that confidence that, hey, this bait does actually work and I do actually catch fish doing it. So once you get that confidence in there, you know, you're going to use that bait more, you know, you're going to use that color more. But, you know, this, you know, the Sexy Sunfish is probably my most favorite color, the most productive color. It doesn't work every day. So you got to be able to have confidence to be able to switch color, different bait, different color, and try something different. But I know crankbaits work, so I'm going to stick with them until a point where I know they're not going to work anymore. Switch over to something else. I do believe that's about all I really wanted to cover on crankbaits, other than there's different kind of retrieves you can do. You know, crankbait is not just a matter of casting it out and just reeling it back in. A lot of times the steady retrieve will catch you a lot of fish, but you also have to look at, there's times where a stop and go is going to work better. You know, reeling real fast, stopping it, reeling real fast. A lot of times that pause is what's going to trigger them to hit. Another thing is if you are reeling it in and you start feeling you're hitting weeds, instead of just keep reeling it, just rip it. A lot of times that ripping action is going to trigger the fish. So, it's a matter of just experimenting. If you got 2 or 3 guys in the boat, if you're all going to throw crankbaits, have one guy doing it this way, another guy doing it that way, and the third guy doing it a different way, until you can figure out what is going to work. So that's Crankbaits 101 in a nutshell. Now, for the kids on the Becker Bass team, I have a trivia question for you. First person that emails me will get a prize pack. The trivia question today is, what angler has won the Bassmaster Angler of the Year 9 times, but has never won a classic? The first person that emails me the correct answer will win that tackle pack. Remember, we'll see you on the water in a couple months.